The contract's real property problem from July 2005 is one of the more difficult and unpleasant questions to appear on the California bar exam. Here we've got a hypothetical that requires us to think on our feet and to discuss some of the more intricate and difficult real property problems. Have a look with me at the call of the question. On what theories might Cora reasonably sue Bayer for his refusal to pay the annual $600 fee to MPI? What defenses will Bayer reasonably assert, and what is the likely outcome on each of Cora's theories and Bayer's defenses? Discuss. Well, we know who the plaintiff is, and we know who the defendant is. We know what the subject matter of the dispute is, but we don't know what the theories are. And as it turns out, we're going to have to think carefully before we write one word in our answer. This is a difficult, tricky question, but it's hardly impossible, and being exposed to this fact pattern will make it much less likely that you will be tricked when it really matters. Have a look with me now at the top of the question. We meet developer. Developer gets a big tract of undeveloped land, and he develops it. He divides it into 10 lots, creates a luxury gated community, and he also makes a deal with a security agency to provide private security for this development at the price of $6,000 per year for 10 years. Then we have Cora coming into existence in paragraph 2. She's the first buyer, and developer sells the remaining 9 lots quickly, and all 10 deeds have quoted language which includes a key word, covenant. That's the core real property theory that Cora is going to rely on, but it is not her only theory. We see that the deed includes a covenant that the buyer will agree to and in fact will pay $600 a year for 10 years to the private security company. We also see that the developer promptly and properly recorded all of the deeds. Okay, that's a relief. At least we don't have to do a deed analysis in our reply to this question. In the next paragraph, we see the security company assigning all of its rights and obligations to some other security company, MPI. And at about the same time, Cora's next-door neighbor, seller, sells his property to buyer. Buyer is the defendant in our case. In the deed between seller and buyer, there is no mention of this covenant. Then we find out that our buyer won't pay the fee to MPI, hence the question at the bottom. Now, in the last paragraph before the call, the new security company, MPI, threatens to suspend security services to the whole subdivision unless it receives assurance that it will be paid the full amount for the remainder of the contract, and Cora wants to make sure that she never has to pay more than $600 a year. And then we get the call of the question again. Well, let's focus on the conduct of MPI. Is it reasonable for them to threaten to suspend performance? Answer, yes, because what we have here is an anticipatory repudiation, and MPI is the victim of that repudiation. And you know that someone who is the victim of anticipatory repudiation has some choices. That person or entity can sue now, can wait until performance is due and then sue, or can seek further assurances. And apparently that's the course of action that MPI has chosen to take. They are seeking further assurances. And my answer to the question will give them the assurances that they seek. Then we have the call of the question, and turn the page and let's look together at the outline of issues that I've offered for this question. Here, the most important thinking that is required to do well in responding to this question is with regard to conceiving the theories of liability in the first part of the answer. And we know that the most important of Cora's theories under real property law will be a breach of covenant theory. And in the outline of issues, you'll see that I just do what I ordinarily advise everybody to do. I use the elements of the law as an organizing principle. So I talk about intent, touch and concern, notice, and privity, because those are all of the elements of whether or not a covenant breach is compensable or not. But then I go a step further, And this is how one would be able to do really well in replying to this question. I consider the possibility that this arrangement is, in fact, an equitable servitude. And if it isn't that, I'd consider it to be perhaps an implied reciprocal servitude, which some of you may have learned to label as an implied negative easement. I think considering it an implied reciprocal servitude is perhaps slightly more accurate. But there's plenty of wiggle room around the edges here. You don't have to slavishly follow my format or my reasoning. But I think you will agree that an answer that goes beyond merely considering a breach of covenant is more thorough, more analytical, and, dare I say it, a little more intelligent than one that is more narrow. That's one reason why I think this is such a difficult question. The call of the question really doesn't give us much. It is asking us to come up with theories. That means the more the merrier. Also, it's obvious that there's a breach of covenant, but these other theories are a little more subtle, and this is what makes essay writing for the bar exam or for law school exams a little bit different than exams in English literature or history or math. Finally, I conclude that the real property theories are strong. But I don't stop there. I also move on to consider a breach of contract theory. And remember, all of these transactions arising out of real estate deals involve contracts. And since this covenant was in all of the original deeds from the developer, Cora can argue that she is an intended third-party beneficiary of that earlier language in the original deed. And this is a somewhat creative theory, but it's an entirely legitimate, reasonable theory on its face. So the heart of this problem is spotting the issues for our response to this first call of the question. Candidates who wrote only about covenant theories could conceivably squeak by with a 65 or maybe a 70 if everything else in the answer was excellent. But candidates who came up with multiple theories and consider them in some lucid, sensible fashion got clearly passing scores. So now turn with me for a few minutes and let's consider this model answer that I present. You'll see, up front with regard to Cora versus Buyer, I spend an unusually long time setting the stage for the analysis. I explain who the parties are, and then, in a couple of lines right at the end, I indicate what Cora's basic theories are. They arise from the law of real property and the law of contracts. I also indicate up front that although there are some defenses available to the defendant, they aren't very strong. I do that because the call of the question focuses our attention on defenses too. So then I turn to the real property issues, and you'll see up front I introduce all of the theories. I state what they will be, and then I go into the analysis. So I begin with what I think we all would agree is the core of the issue, the breach of covenant. And this is where having a little checklist about the elements is useful, because I'm not doing anything very creative here. The creative part is in seeing the other theories. All I'm doing here is simple analysis based on applying the facts to the elements of the legal principles. And the elements include intent, touch and concern, and notice. And as we look at them in a little bit more depth, we see that this is really quite simple. This isn't a hard answer to create. We apply the facts to the elements, and it seems quite evident that the plaintiff should win money damages based on a breach of covenant. And as I indicated, that's probably enough, barely enough, to get a passing score. But we want to do a lot better than that. We'd like to set the curve rather than ride it. So we move on to consider equitable servitude and an implied reciprocal servitude. And you'll see that for both of these, I think we'd all agree these are secondary real property issues. I don't go into nearly as much depth because much of what we've said with regard to the covenant will apply to these other theories from real property too. And it seems to me that, here again, the plaintiff has got a fairly compelling case. Next, we turn to defenses. And it seems evident that we don't have very much to say on the behalf of Buyer. And I say that as a defense lawyer with something of an apparent defense bias. Here's a case that I would encourage the buyer to settle rather than litigate. And it seems to me that the defenses are weak, so I conclude that the buyer is in breach and will be liable. But I'm not quite done. Then I turn to the contract theory of liability and the third-party beneficiary aspect, and I only spend a couple of paragraphs on it before I conclude that her contract theory is a little complicated and maybe even a little weird, but her real property theory is strong. So my conclusion is that Cora wins and that Cora will be able to enforce the covenant and force the buyer to pay this fee.